I think the first point certainly bears mention, which is the need to restore the trust of the American people in Congress. And the best way to do that, I believe, is to open up the legislative process in the Senate, to once again allow senators to be senators, meaning allow senators to propose amendments and have those amendments debated and discussed and voted upon. By amendments, I mean, possible changes to bills that are pending before the Senate. That's what has differentiated the Senate from other legislative bodies throughout the United States and throughout the world, is this open-ended amendment process. It's been dormant for the last few years, and as Republicans, we need to open it up. I also think it's very important for us to focus on undoing cronyism in Washington, for us to abide by the conservative ideal that it's not the job of government to select winners and losers in business. We need to be passing a budget, and a budget that ought to satisfy certain criteria. I'd like to see a budget, for example, that could bring us to balance within 10 years and do so without raising taxes and without any gimmicks, any accounting gimmicks that would make it look like we're getting to balance when we're really not. I'd like to see us move to fix broken policies in government that aren't working, not just cutting, but fixing. And I'd also like to see us moving to Ryanize the committees in the House and in the Senate, meaning to think big. When Paul Ryan assumed the chairmanship of the Budget Committee in the House a few years ago, he thought really big. And he said, we've got a big entitlement state. That entitlement state is under threat right now because if left alone, it's not going to prove sustainable. And Americans who have relied on it for decades aren't going to have access to those benefits unless we reform it. I'd like to see every committee chairman in Congress, in the House and in the Senate, take a similar approach and to think really big about policies that are important to the American people.
Now that you control both chambers of Congress, people might assume, okay, you'll be able to collaborate and get things done quickly, but the Republicans have a problem that the Democrats don't face, and that they're not all lockstep in uniformity. So, and you've addressed that in your problem, but could you tell our readers how it is that that can be an asset and how you plan to deal with it?
I think it's a good thing. I think diversity of opinion within a political party and within a legislative body is important. And I think when you get a lot of people who come together and they come at a particular discussion from different vantage points, you end up with legislative solutions that make a lot more sense. And I think within our party we have a real opportunity to bring together divergent viewpoints. And I also think that will be helpful in bringing Democrats into the equation as well.
You advised to go bold. People have said that the way to build momentum is to do things incrementally, to sort of get the ball rolling, but you think there's a place for both.
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can go bold and also achieve incremental progress where it's available. There's nothing wrong with plucking the low-hanging fruit. And in fact, I think we ought to do that. We also need to be bold and thinking 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years out and figuring out where we want to be then, taking the bold steps now to move us in the direction.
You could certainly improve the reputation of Congress by getting by having the House and Senate send bills to actually be able to send bills to the president that get on his desk. But isn't his extremism the real problem? Is that he would be unlikely to approve things that perhaps the majority of Americans might like to see, such as the Keystone Pipeline, something like that?
Perhaps, and that's something that we face. But I think that the fact that he might be that way is not a reason for us not to try. In other words, if we pass something like the Keystone XL pipeline, if he wants to veto that, he's got to look the American people in the eye and explain to them why it is that whatever interest he's trying to protect is more important than the many, many tens of thousands of jobs this would create, why it's more important than the energy security that this would help North America secure. That's one of the reasons why we can't assume, we shouldn't just assume the president's going to veto a particular bill, therefore it's not worth pursuing. The other thing is we won't know for sure until we try. It's one thing for the president to say, I might veto that. It's one thing for us to assume he would. It's quite another for him to do it.
You also expressed a desire for no more cliff crises. How do you avoid that when you're dealing with a president who is so diametrically opposed to so much of what your party represents?
A lot of this starts with very simple steps that Congress can take. We haven't had a budget in nearly 6 years. Without a budget, we tend not to have what's called a regular order appropriations process, where we incrementally pass a dozen or so bills, each of which will fund a different set of government functions. One bill funding national defense, for example, one bill funding criminal justice programs, and so on and so forth. So without a budget, you don't have that regular order sequential appropriations process, and without that, you end up with a single binary choice at the end of a fiscal year. You either vote to pass a continuing resolution, or in some cases an omnibus spending package, usually a continuing resolution, that funds everything basically at current levels with certain minor exceptions and adjustments, or you don't fund it at all. And that's what brings us to the point of governing by cliff. If we can pass a budget, which I think we should be able to do, we'll be miles ahead of where we have been in the last few years toward avoiding this kind of governing by cliff posture.
Do you think you can actually have confidence building measures with the President himself?
Perhaps, perhaps. I would like to see some. And, you know, we saw President Clinton, for example, after the Republican Revolution of 1994. He came back to Washington a different man, a much more pragmatic man, a man who was interested in working with Congress and willing to do what it takes to get there. I'd love to see that out of this president. He at least said that he was interested in doing that shortly after the election, and I look forward to working with him. I look forward to finding common ground. I hope he's willing to meet us on some of these. I hope that he's willing to acknowledge that elections have consequences and to work with us to find common ground where it exists.